Hey guys, tonight we slip behind soot-smeared scrolls in candlelit archives, your fingertips brushing ancient parchment as whispers of forgotten quills echo through vaulted halls. You probably won't survive this subtle labyrinth of obfuscated truths. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we all know where on earth you're about to become historically unsettled. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down narrow corridors of memory where early chroniclers, those medieval influencers, carefully curated every entry. In late 9th century England, King Alfred commissioned what became the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, an analytic ledger recording battles, famines, and coronations year by year. Historians still argue whether those scribes were state propagandists or genuine record keepers, but either way, you can almost smell the iron-tinted air of war mixed with ink. It's like scrolling through your social feed, just with fewer cat videos and more salty monk complaints. Picture a dim scriptorium, the warmth of a smoking brazier, tattered vellum lying flat under your palm. Candle drips pooling like teardrops on the windowsill. Monks in hooded robes lean in eyes narrowing. They draft tales of conquest and piety, but behind the holy veneer, they're quietly erasing rival kings from the story. Mainstream fact, the Chronicle doesn't mention Alfred's defeat at the Battle of Sinwit until decades later, conveniently glossing over his near-miss escape. Fringe historians whisper that a certain scribe tucked a recipe for fermented turnip juice into the margin, believing it warded off witches during sieges. It reads more like a culinary footnote than political sabotage. But hey, every detail counts when you're crafting a narrative. Remember how you trusted your newsfeed until you realized half the story was sponsored content? Well, welcome to the Middle Ages. Those early entries often began with, "in the year of our Lord," but ended with, "and if you believe that by my miracle salve." Okay, maybe not the latter, but you catch the drift. Chronicles doubled as medieval marketing. One monk even doodled a cartoonish dragon chasing a rival bishop in the border, presumably to vent frustration or earn a laugh on late-night script-writing sessions. You'd think the abbey would mind, but rumor has it they laughed so hard they left it in. As you lean closer, you feel the grain of that vellum cool under your palm, the faint scent of goat hair, brushes still clinging to margins. Sensory detail. The low hum of chanting drifts from distant choir stalls, blending with the scratch of quill on skin. You half expect the walls to respond, reciting tales of usurped thrones and vanished heirs. Scholars still argue whether those omissions were deliberate acts of censorship or simple clerical sloppiness. Either way, every absence is a presence worth noticing. A light joke for you if you think your group chat edits messages. Try convincing a medieval monk that rewriting history isn't fake news. They'd glare at you like you just suggested squirrels invented writing. Yet those early chronicles mattered. Peasants read them to know when to pay taxes, nobles consulted them to justify invasions, and priests preached from them to inspire obedience. Your pulse quickens at the thought each copied line carried power, each blank line invited reinterpretation. So here you are, eyes adjusting to flickering lamplight, tracing faded ink that once swayed kingdoms. The first promise of hidden power emerges. History is not a neutral mirror, but a carefully chiseled sculpture. Those dusty pages bear witness to rulers who knew that if you control the narrative, you control the realm. And as you tiptoe through margins thick with silent edits, you realize the earliest secret weapon of power was simply the ability to hide the truth in plain sight. You glide into a vaulted chamber where stone reliefs depict dripping primordial waters and incense curls around colossal statues. Tonight you're unspooling the very threads of origin tales that rulers rewove to hang their crowns on. Historians still argue whether these grand myths were grassroots beliefs or carefully staged political theatre. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Enuma Elish Babylon's creation epic was recited each spring at the Akitu festival to exalt Marduk as supreme god, effectively crowning him, and by extension, the king who championed his cult. You can almost taste the bitter tang of date wine on your tongue as priests chant in a chorus vibrating through clay walls. Rulers realized early that if you control the origin story, you control destiny. Pharaohs in Egypt claimed to be living incarnations of Horus, son of Ra, strolling among mortals in gold sandals. Mainstream fact during the reign of Akhenaten 1353-1336 BCE, he attempted to upend centuries of polytheism by erecting a monotheistic cult around the Aten. The sun disk proof that even a sun-obsessed king could burn too brightly for his own good. You inhale the soft heat radiating from sandstone columns, while faint hieroglyphs whisper of divine bloodlines, and you chuckle if you think your relatives exaggerate. At family reunions, try claiming you're a god's heir. In the High Middle Ages, Charlemagne's court commissioned Einhard's Vitae Caroli Magni, scripting the Frankish king's lineage back to the Trojans. Scholarly debates persist over whether Einhard embellished those roots or simply drafted clickbait for literate nobles. Cue your modern eye roll if you thought sponsored content was new. Imagine a medieval manuscript selling hero ancestry like a deluxe movie sequel. And just like that doodled dragon chasing a rival bishop, in the margins of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, scribes slipped in heroic exaggerations, winged horses' giant hoofprints the size of wagon wheels to spice up the storyline. Fringe theorists whisper that some Greek city-states borrowed parts of the Sumerian Enki's watery origin myth, retrofitting Poseidon as an earth-shaking sea god to rally coastal troops. You eye the carved reliefs of tridents and wave-bossing tridents and think great. Now even Poseidon plagiarized. Yet these adaptations mattered. They anchored civic identity, justified temple tithes, and softened the blow when the sea salted your crops. One priest allegedly hid a recipe for fermented turnip juice in the margins. Apparently it granted prophetic dreams of impending floods. It makes you nostalgic for the medieval monks' fermented turnip footnotes, even as you imagine yourself snickering at their bargain basement miracle cures. You feel the grain of sun-baked clay under your fingertips, the warm glow of an oil lamp bleeding across carved cuneiform wedges. You almost expect the walls to whisper, "Remember you promised to like, subscribe and comment your local time," a callback to that cheeky CTA burned into your memory. Indeed, ancient rulers treated origin myths like content marketing, seeding narratives across generations to condition loyalty, like binge-watching a Netflix series where every episode ends with "to be continued" in a new temple complex. A light joke drifts through your thoughts if you think your group chat edits messages. Try convincing a pharaoh's scribe to rewrite the cosmos mid-scroll. And another imagine sidling up to an Akkadian priest and asking for the director's cut of creation. He'd probably glare and mutter something about your hair blocking the lamplight. Lastly, if you believe any of this was accidental, I have some enchanted pyramids to auction you, complete with built-in curse protection, no extra charge. Your ear tunes to distant chanting, a lullaby of drum beats and ritual horns echoing off polished alabaster. Scholars still argue whether these myths reflected actual beliefs or were top-down propaganda. Did the people genuinely fear a seven-headed sea monster? Or were they amused by the dramatic flair? You swallow tasting faint dust and incense, your mind dancing between conviction and skepticism. As you drift through that softly lit corridor, you sense how every chiseled monument, every hymn, every dramatic plot twist in a king's origin saga served a hidden purpose, power projection disguised as holy narrative. Each elaboration, every borrowed detail solidified a ruler's claim to divine right. And just like the crooked scribe who slipped a cartoon dragon into a margin, these myth-spinning monarchs understood the value of a good plot twist. So you lean back, eyes tracing gilded reliefs of cosmic battles, and realize that the true genesis of authority lies not in raw force, but in the artful crafting of beginnings. By rewriting creation itself, rulers didn't just claim the throne, they claimed the cosmos. And tonight you're witness to their subtle sleight of hand. You slip into a hushed alcove, where flickering candles gild carved arches, the scent of frankincense swirling like ghostly tendrils around your shoulders as you discover how sacred scrolls became sanctified. Propaganda, you probably won't believe how many edits hide in plain sight. In the late 4th century CE, Jerome finalized the Vulgate, a Latin translation of the Bible that became the Catholic Church's official text for over a millennium. Historians still argue whether his choices reflected theological conviction or political pressure from church leaders, but either way, scribes dutifully erased alternative readings to reinforce clerical authority. Feel the smooth parchment under your fingertips, still warm from the heat of a brazier, and the faint rasp of vellum as you turn each page. Early manuscripts of the Pentateuch show erasures so neat they'd put autocorrect to shame. Entire verses recast to emphasize priestly privileges. Fringe scholars whisper of a solitary monk who slipped a recipe for holy goat cheese into the margin, claiming it ensured divine visions when consumed during Lent. You snort picturing a monk Instagramming #blessed cheese before the hashtag even existed. Imagine you're in a candlelit scriptorium at the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, where bishops argue creed details like rival YouTube commentators debating whether pineapple belongs on pizza. One bishop suggests tweaking a phrase to bolster imperial power, another objects, but the official version goes on to justify the emperor's divine right. Mainstream fact. The Nicene Creed originally declared Christ of one substance with the Father, a phrase hotly contested until Athanasius's faction prevailed. Scholars still argue whether those semantic shifts aimed at theological precision or empire-building spin. You inhale cold stone and fresh ink as quills scratch out Gnostic Gospels deemed too subversive, replacing them with polished parables that reward obedience. Remember that cartoonish dragon doodle from the Anglo-Saxon margins? Here the erasures are subtler, like Photoshop layers hiding inconvenient truths. One scribe joked he felt like editing Wikipedia, only his audience was illiterate peasants clutching prayer beads. A light joke drifts through. If you think your autocorrect mangles texts, try convincing a 4th century monk that eternal damnation was too harsh. He'd glare like you just suggested turning the Psalms into a pop song. Another imagine texting the Pope a revised gospel manuscript. He might reply, LOL, wrong version, send original. And one more, if you believe none of this was manipulative, I have a miracle salve to sell you that cures everything except skepticism. Sensory detail blankets you, the low chant of Latin intonation, the metallic tang of ink, and the whisper-soft crackle of new parchment. The walls seem to hum, echoing back debates over doctrinal wording, each echo a reminder that words shape faith and dominion. Fringe rumor insists that some scribes hid microscopic symbols in decorated initials, tiny keystones only visible through polished obsidian lenses believed to unlock divine secrets. You smile thinking how even medieval monks craved Easter eggs before they were cool. As you wander, you sense that every amendment, every erased line fortified an invisible hierarchy, from lay worshippers kneeling below a robed clergy to emperors anointed by bishops. Education was exclusive, and controlling sacred texts ensured that only the initiated could question church authority. Historians still argue whether this centralization sparked medieval scholasticism or suppressed alternative spiritualities. But one thing's clear: power and piety were inked together. You press your palm against a stone column, cool beneath flickering torchlight, recalling that fermented turnip footnote from the Anglo-Saxon margins, proof that humour thrived even in holy halls. Here the humour is hushed marginal doodles depicting bishops riding winged pigs, satirical jabs at ecclesiastical pomposity. One scribe even documented a prank in which a rival abbot's robe was secretly dyed purple overnight, an embarrassing scandal immortalized in an anonymous chronicle. Modern asides drift in, you picture today's scholars scrolling digital facsimiles, cursor hovering over a redacted line, like a detective. It's like binge-watching a conspiracy series, where every episode ends with "to be continued," "next restoration," and you, bleary-eyed at 2 a.m. think, "Great, another cliffhanger, just what I needed before bed." Ultimately, you realize that sacred narratives were never static. They were living scripts revised to uphold hierarchies. Each doctrinal tweak, every excised heresy, stitched together a tapestry of control, ensuring that belief itself became a tool of governance. And as you step back, candles guttering, you carry the shiver of understanding. Power doesn't just wield a sword, it wields a quill. You step onto sun-baked marble steps, the air tinged with dust and overheated limestone, as towering columns loom above here. Monuments themselves speak louder than any decree broadcasting power in stone. Historians still argue whether Emperor Hadrian's Pantheon dome was meant as an architectural marvel or a celestial propaganda piece glorifying Rome's divine favor, but either way, its oculus beaming daylight onto worshippers felt like a cosmic spotlight on imperial glory. You feel the slight tremor of passing tour buses below the distant chatter of selfie sticks, clicking, a modern echo of ancient onlookers craning their necks in awe. In ancient China, the terracotta army greets you with a silent earthen soldiers, arrayed in perfect battle formation. Mainstream fact: Qin Shi Huang's mausoleum complex houses over 8,000 life-sized terracotta warriors. Horses and chariots, each meticulously crafted to accompany the first emperor into the afterlife. Fringe lore claims that some figures conceal tiny clay scrolls within their torsos, detailing secret military strategies, though excavators have found nothing more mysterious than a few loose shards of pottery and an old waterlogged flip-flop. You chuckle at the image of that flip-flop, imagining an ancient courier losing his sandal mid-shipment. Talk about sole survivors of history. The temple facades, the soaring columns, the carved reliefs all function like ancient billboards. Triumph, legitimacy, eternity. Historians still argue whether Trajan's column spiraling skyward in downtown Rome doubled as a propaganda scroll depicting Emperor Trajan's victories over Dacia in a continuous frieze, or whether it was simply a commemorative monument admired by passing senators. You run your fingers along the fluted shaft in your mind, though in reality you'd be banned from touching it, and imagine each carved soldier frozen mid-stride, their tiny clay feet echoing your own stomps. Wandering beneath the Colossus of Rhodes's hypothetical shadow, you sense how scale itself becomes a statement. Though the bronze giant collapsed in 226 BCE, reports say its legs stood astride the harbor entrance, like a giant tripod. Historians still argue whether travelers actually passed through the gap, or whether medieval tale spinners exaggerated the story for dramatic effect. Fringe scholars whisper that local merchants collected fallen rivets as souvenirs, believing they carried protective magic against storms. You envision a souvenir shop selling original Colossus rivet keychains move over Disneyland. Modern asides drift in. You imagine an ancient influencer live streaming from the Parthenon's steps, hashtagging had that goddess goals, and complaining about the lack of Wi-Fi. A light joke drifts. If you think your city's tourist crowds are bad, try convincing a Spartan to pose for a group selfie. He'd probably lance your camera with a spear. Another, you look for the "You are here" sticker on the Arc de Triomphe, but realize the emperor never thought of idiot-proofing his victory arch. And one more if you believe none of this was intentional messaging. I have a pyramid-shaped energy converter to sell you pre-assembled batteries not included. Close your eyes and inhale the resin-sweet smell of incense still lingering among temple ruins. You almost hear the distant clang of chisels shaping stone, the echo of laborers singing rhythmic chants as they heave granite blocks into place. Sensory detail, the gentle breeze carries faint jasmine from courtyard gardens, mixing with the scent of sweat and sand. That breeze whispers stories of dedications inscribed at the base of obelisks, proclaiming allegiance to gods and emperors alike. Walk through the gateway of the Ishtar Gate in ancient Babylon, its walls glittering with glazed blue bricks and reliefs of dragons and aurochs. Mainstream fact: King Nebuchadnezzar built it circa 575 BCE as part of his grand processional way, its magnificence intended to intimidate both enemies and visiting dignitaries. Fringe rumor insists that hidden beneath the bricks are secret chambers where court jesters performed satire plays mocking rival kingdoms, an underground comedy club predating modern improv by 2 millennia. You grin at the thought of a clay tablet stand-up routine, so a satrap walks into a cigarette. Monumental messages don't vanish with empire. Look to Paris's Eiffel Tower, erected for the 1889 Exposition Universelle as an emblem of French industrial prowess. You stroll beneath its lattice ironwork pigeons, cooing overhead street vendors hawking miniature replicas. Historians still argue whether Gustav Eiffel designed it as a temporary fair attraction or envisioned it forever altering the city's skyline as proof of France's technological leadership. Fringe enthusiasts claim secret messages coded in the rivet patterns reveal hidden love letters from Eiffel to his mistress, though the only love letter you find is the one glowing from your phone screen as you check your battery percentage. Architecture is power's silent language, from the shadow-casting pyramids of Giza to the grand boulevards of Haussmannized Paris. Every arch, dome and walkway crafts a narrative. You sense the weight of history underfoot as you pass cobblestones, each stone laid to impress, to intimidate, to immortalize. Remember that cartoonish dragon doodle in an Anglo-Saxon margin. Here the dragons are in glazed brick, roaring above your head, daring you to question the story. A light joke for you before we move on: if you thought your to-do list was long, try reading the full inscriptions on the Luxor obelisk spoiler. It's basically a bronze resume bragging about Ramses's accomplishments. And another, imagine a time traveler swiping right on an Instagram filter to see these monuments in their original colors. He'd be blinded by neon blues and golds. Finally, if you believe all this stone-cold messaging was unintentional, I know a guy who'll sell you a spontaneously erected triumphant arch next Tuesday, no questions asked. You pause as the wind rustles through broken columns, carrying the distant rumble of traffic in the modern city beyond. Sensory detail, the faint vibration underfoot, reminds you that power shifts not only through dynasties, but through time itself. Scholars still argue whether preserving these monuments honors history or perpetuates ancient propaganda, but whichever side you take, you can't deny their magnetic pull. As you walk away from the crumbling gateway, the stones seem to murmur challenges: whose victories will endure, which voices will be forgotten, and you, half awake yet fully entranced, realize that every monumental message etched in stone has shaped your world one carved block at a time. You unroll a time-warped parchment across a creaking oak table, its surface dimpled with water stains and ink blots. The moment you see those drawn coastlines, you realize maps themselves can be masterful deceptions. Maps aren't neutral guides. They're silent treaties, etched in vellum. In the early 2nd century CE, the Greek geographer Ptolemy produced his geography charting the known world on a grid scholars later revered as gospel. Historians still argue whether Ptolemy's source data came from sailors' logs or from Roman propaganda meant to impress tax collectors. But either way, medieval copyists faithfully reproduced his one-eyed view of Earth. Feel the rough grain of that parchment under your fingertips, the faint scent of aged animal hide mingled with musty library air. As your finger traces the tightly drawn lines of Europe, Asia, and Africa, you swallow imagining traders sailing confidently into phantom seas. Mainstream fact. Ptolemy's map omitted the Americas, entirely reinforcing the idea that the Atlantic was a vanishing void, a blank canvas on which future empires would paint their claims. Fringe cartographers whispered of a secret Vinland map that depicted Newfoundland centuries before Columbus, though modern chemical analysis suggests it might be a 20th century forgery. If you thought your group chat had questionable authenticity, try convincing a map dealer that his prized Vinland is actually a 1950s reproduction. He'd huff like you walked over his pet dragon. Slide your nostrils over the parchment, detecting pigmented charcoal, a hint of metal from the stylus, and the lingering aroma of beeswax used to seal corrections. You can almost hear the scratch of quill nib on skin, punctuated by cursive numbers scribbled in the margins. Remember that cartoonish dragon doodle chasing a rival bishop? Here, cartographers instead sketched sea monsters, krakens with tentacles writhing across ocean swathes as warnings to timid sailors. One map even shows an island kingdom ruled by unicorns whose horns cure plague. Talk about travel brochures overselling. You pause at the Treaty of Tordesillas line, drawn in 1494 by a papal decree to divide newly discovered lands between Spain and Portugal. Historians still argue whether the demarcation set 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands reflected geographic reality or was simply an arbitrary scribble to appease monarchs. Mainstream fact. The line granted Brazil to Portugal and most of the Americas to Spain, shaping centuries of colonial history. Fringe rumor claims some Spanish explorers secretly bribed clerics to shift the line further west with invisible ink, practically cartographic guerrilla warfare. You grin at the thought of early map hackers rewriting history with ecclesiastical receipts. Modern asides drift in. Imagine your GPS recalibrating itself to a Mercator projection, turning Greenland into a monstrous ice continent rivaling Africa in size. If you think your phone's map misleads you, now thank Gerardus Mercator's 1569 design that favored navigational angles over actual area. A light joke, if Mercator were alive today, he'd be the MySpace of cartography, revered in niche circles, but cringeworthy for practical use. Another ever try measuring distance on a Google map with a ruler. It's like asking a medieval monk to calculate pizza delivery time. And one more, if you believe all map distortions were innocent mistakes. I've got a digitally altered mountain of eternal cheese map to sell you perfect for nocturnal cravings. You lean closer, noticing minute color variations, ochre for deserts, emerald for forests, sapphire for seas, and the faint residue of shellac where corrections were glued in. You inhale that slightly sweet resin tang and hear the low thud of leather-bound tomes being set on reading tables, the flutter of curtains shielding candlelight from drafts. As you pore over a 17th century Dutch world map, you spot the famed Terra Australis Incognita sprawling across the bottom margin, a massive southern continent dreamed up to balance northern landmasses. Historians still argue whether cartographers genuinely believed it existed or simply indulged in speculative art to sell more prints. French scribes claimed they'd interviewed natives who described snow-topped mountains inhabited by birdmen clearly before they Googled penguin. You stifle a chuckle imagining someone paddling ashore with a selfie stick only to be greeted by flapping albatrosses. Recall the fermented turnip footnote from section 1. Here some savvy map dealers allegedly hid coupons for free cups of spiced wine in map margins, proof that marketing tactics aren't exactly a modern invention. You imagine tourists lining up in 18th century Paris, waving maps as tickets. A light joke: if you thought today's coupons expired too quickly, try using a map coupon that's centuries past due. Nobody's scanning that QR code. Another, imagine a hipster collector bragging about owning an original Mercator only to find out it's laminated gasp. Before you roll up the parchment, you note how power dynamics hinge on these drawn borders. Invisible lines dictate taxes, territories, languages, and identities. Maps tell you where you belong until you realize someone else drew those lines to serve their own interests. You pocket that revelation like a secret compass, heart fluttering as candlelight dances across the curls of ancient script. And as your fingertips release the map you carry with you, the shiver of knowing that when history is drawn on paper, every line draws a line of power. You slip into a dimly lit chamber lined with towering shelves of aged tomes, the scent of burning tallow and old leather curling around you as you prepare to witness how selective learning became a silent leash on society. Mainstream fact: in 213 BCE, China's first emperor Qin Shi Huang famously ordered the burning of hundreds of Confucian texts and the live burial of dissenting scholars to unify thought under his rule. Historians still argue whether that draconian censorship truly consolidated imperial control or whether it stifled a flowering of ideas that might have reshaped Chinese civilization. Run your fingertips along spines etched with gilded titles, feeling the rough grain of woodworm-punctured panels. Fringe scholars whisper that a handful of banned scrolls were secretly encoded in hollow bamboo pens, their ink formulas so corrosive they ate through parchment when exposed to daylight, proof that illicit knowledge can burn brighter than any state-sanctioned flame. You almost gag at the imagined tang of that clandestine ink, a callback to the fermented turnip footnote tucked into Anglo-Saxon margins you uncovered back in section 1. Imagine the grandeur of Alexandria's great library before its fall, tens of thousands of papyrus scrolls, catalogued by subject workshops humming with copying scribes. Mainstream fact: some estimates place its holdings at over 500,000 scrolls, making it the ancient world's knowledge capital. Yet medieval accounts claim the library's destruction was more bureaucratic blunder than barbarian onslaught. A scholarly debate echoing today was Alexandria robbed by external invaders or internally strangled by neglect. You picture a lone librarian hiding forbidden texts behind a false wall, leaving behind only a single papyrus note that reads, "You probably shouldn't read this," a cheeky reminder that curiosity never stays caged. Fast forward to 15th century Europe, where the advent of Gutenberg's press threatened ecclesiastical gatekeepers. Printers faced licensing decrees, fines, and even public book burnings when they printed unauthorized pamphlets. Fringe rumor insists that some agitators printed pamphlets so small they slipped through prison bars like microscopic manifestos, urging peasants to question their lords. A light joke drifts if you think your group chat has disappearing messages. Try smuggling a subversive pamphlet under your cloak. No Snapchat filter required. The Church answered with its Index Librorum Prohibitorum in 1559, listing books forbidden to faithful Catholics. Mainstream fact: the Index eventually banned works by luminaries from Erasmus to Galileo, chilling scholarly inquiry across Europe. Scholars still argue whether the index delayed scientific revolutions or whether clandestine academies simply rerouted the flow of ideas underground, an academic clash as heated as any modern open forum flame war. You smile picturing secret societies huddled over candlelight debating heliocentrism in hushed whispers, while footmen outside stomped to drown out the sound of dissent. Sensory detail envelops you, the faint crackle of candle wicks, the soft echo of turning pages, and the metallic scent of ink mixed with the musty odor of damp vaults. You catch a glimpse of a medieval manuscript margin where a prankish scribe sketched that cartoon dragon doodle you know so well, only this time the dragon holds a quill labeled Censored. It makes you grin clearly. Even centuries ago, humor was the ultimate loophole. Leap to the Ottoman Empire, where Sultan Mehmed II founded the Imperial Library in Istanbul to gather manuscripts from across conquered lands. Mainstream fact: by the late 15th century, his collection numbered over 100,000 volumes, spanning theology, science and poetry. Fringe whisper claims a secret subterranean archive lies beneath Topkapi Palace, its vaulted corridors lit by phosphorescent moss and guarded by scholar genies, though explorers have only found a stray waterlogged flip-flop and several dusty lanterns. Another light joke: if you think museum lost and found is bad, imagine a genie handing you a soggy slipper and saying, "Is this yours?" In our digital age, governments employ firewalls and algorithmic filters to control what you read online. Mainstream fact: China's Great Firewall blocks thousands of foreign websites and keywords, daily shaping citizens' information diets. Historians still argue whether today's net censorship parallels ancient book burnings, or whether the scale and subtlety make it a wholly new phenomenon. Fringe rumor posits that some state-sponsored AI bots generate convincing pseudo-research papers to muddy the waters like a digital Potemkin library built on lines of code. You let out a soft laugh, imagining an algorithm stuck in a loop repeatedly recommending cat videos to distract you from politics. Through every era you feel the weight of whispered edicts and secret footnotes, the tactile thrill of discovering a forbidden page. Knowledge is power, and power sanitized knowledge. As you back away from that echoing vault of half-burned scrolls and subterranean legends, you carry a shiver. The true control lies not in banning what you see, but in deciding what you never know. You wander into a hushed gallery lit by soft spotlights, the polished wooden floor glinting underfoot as you approach a colossal canvas whose colors seem to hum with hidden intent. You probably won't spot all the secrets at once. So before your eyes adjust fully, lean in close and take it all in. Here every brushstroke becomes a cipher, every background detail an unspoken manifesto. Consider Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, painted around 1498 on the refectory wall of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. Mainstream fact: Leonardo arranged the apostles in groups of 3, framing Christ at the center to symbolize the Holy Trinity and guide the viewer's gaze with divine precision. Historians still argue whether those groupings also reference astrological signs or secret cabals within the church hierarchy. Lean forward and feel the rough plaster beneath your fingertips. Though Da Vinci's fresco is too fragile to touch, your mind's fingertips trace each ripple in the angelic drapery. You spot that little patch of shadow behind Judas' fringe, art aficionados. Whisper it, conceals a hidden Latin inscription detailing a secret alliance between Milan's ruling Sforza family and the papacy. You smirk at the thought of a Renaissance-era leak, like someone slipping a modern-day email chain into a dusty codex. A light joke drifts through your thoughts. If you thought your group chat drama was spicy, imagine cardinal gossip immortalized in oil and tempera. Another: if Judas's purse had a Venmo handle, you'd probably block it before he skimmed your soul. And one more if you believe none of this conspiracy chatter, I have a bottled miracle salve guaranteed to resurrect your interest in art history, no subscription required. You shift your weight, the soft creak of floorboards echoing like a late-night groan, and move on to Diego Velázquez's Las Meninas, 1656. There the Infanta Margarita's gaze meets yours through a mirror reflection, mainstream fact. Velázquez painted himself at the left canvas, edge, brush, poised, suggesting the painter's elevated status at the Spanish court. Scholars still argue whether that mirror is a playful commentary on art's illusion or a coded message to aristocrats about who truly held power behind the throne. You inhale the faint scent of aged varnish mixed with musty air, and imagine Velázquez winking at you from the shadows, daring you to decode his subtle subversion. Fringe lore insists that Velázquez tucked a tiny self-portrait of King Philip IV into the folds of the Infanta's gown, visible only under ultraviolet light. You grin, picturing yourself in scuba gear with a UV lamp exploring museum walls like a nocturnal treasure hunter. A light joke if you think your phone's ultraviolet camera filter is useless. Try finding a king's face in a 17th century dress. You might end up discovering more than you bargained for. Another Velázquez's self-portrait stance is so casual it's basically the Renaissance version of "Hey, look at my latest selfie." And one more if you believe the Infanta wasn't in on the joke. I have an enchanted mirror that records your reaction in slow motion. Your footsteps echo as you approach Pablo Picasso's Guernica, 1937, that sprawling monochrome mural charged with wartime agony. Mainstream fact: Picasso painted Guernica in response to the 1937 bombing of the Basque town by Nazi-aligned forces using fractured forms to convey chaos and protest. Historians still argue whether its symbols like the dying horse or the lamp-bearing woman reflect specific individuals or broader archetypes of suffering. You feel a chill as you imagine the shouting crowds. Picasso never painted the rattle of bombs that never howl on canvas but resonate in your chest. A fringe theory holds that Picasso hid a tiny swastika under one of the horse's hooves, an intentional yet ambiguous nod to the invaders. You roll your eyes, picturing a curator dismantling the painting to retrieve a microscopic symbol, like an art world archaeologist dusting for fingerprints. A light joke if you think your nightmares are dramatic. Try sleeping under Guernica. You might wake up protesting your own pillow. Another Picasso's fragmented style is basically Cubism's version of a broken group chat, everyone's voice overlapping in chaos. And one more if you believe Guernica is just a painting. I have a bomb threat to sell you, totally metaphorical of course. Sensory detail swirls around you, the hushed footsteps of other late-night wanderers, the faint smell of gallery leather benches, the soft click of a security camera panning. In a corner you notice Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory, 1931, with its gooey clocks melting over barren branches. Mainstream fact: Dali's surreal landscape was inspired by the Catalonian coastline near Portligot and his fascination with Einstein's relativity theory. Scholars still argue whether the melting clocks symbolize the fluidity of time or whether Dali was merely hung over and spilled syrup on a pocket watch. Fringe rumor insists that Dali painted a microscopic moustache on each clock face, visible only under a jeweler's loupe, mocking his own iconic facial hair. You stifle a laugh at the thought of art historians squinting at tiny moustaches centuries later. Remember that medieval scribe's cartoon dragon from section 3. Here the dragons are in oil paint, emerging in tiny shadows, among melting watches, playful pockets of whimsy. You lean close to a painting by Giotto, spotting a hidden footprint in dusty fresco plaster, rumored to belong to the artist himself. A light joke if you think your feet leave a digital trail online. Try tracking an artist's footsteps in a 700-year-old chapel. Another Giotto's discreet signature is the medieval equivalent of G at the end of a text message. And one more if you believe these hidden marks were accidental. I have a fingerprint powder kit to test your own walls tonight. As you drift between canvases, you feel the weight of allegory pressed against your skin like a cloak. Each painting becomes a coded dispatch from its creator, a whispered confession of power or dissent. The dank scent of the gallery's ventilation system mingles with the muted tones, and you almost expect a hidden door to click open, revealing a clandestine studio where artists met to plot revolutions in pigment and perspective. You move toward René Magritte's The Son of Man, 1964, the man in bowler hat whose face is obscured by an apple. Mainstream fact, Magritte painted it as a commentary on hidden identity and the mystery of the visible, challenging viewers to question what lies beneath. Historians still argue whether that floating apple signifies temptation, censorship, or just a surreal party trick. Fringe enthusiasts claim Magritte embedded microscopic mathematical formulas in the apple's shadow, a puzzle to one day unlock time travel. You grin at the notion of physicists squabbling over an invisible equation in a fruit's shadow. Sensory detail, the slight hum of air conditioning, the cold metal of a nearby sculpture's pedestal, and the soft thud of your heartbeat as you realize every artwork here is an allegory for control, whether ecclesiastical, royal, or ideological. You trace your gaze across portraits, altarpieces, murals, and murals within murals, each layer inviting you to question who painted the history and why. And as you linger before a small unsigned painting tucked in a corner, you catch a glimpse of a tiny quill symbol in the lower margin, an anonymous artist's signature, or a clandestine editorial mark scholars still debate its origin. You step back, feeling the gallery's cool hush envelop you, and you carry with you a newfound sense in the realm of art. Brush and canvas have always been as mighty as sword and scepter. You step into a vast plaza echoing with drumming footsteps and the rustle of silk banners. The air heavy with incense and expectations. You probably won't escape this spectacle without feeling its pull. Tonight you're immersed in the whirl of ritual pageantry where every gesture, chant and crown solidifies unseen power. Feel the tremor underfoot as a legion of cuirassiers marches past their polished helmets, catching torchlight like obsidian mirrors. Mainstream fact, during a Roman triumph, the victorious general paraded through the city under a laurel leaf arch, riding in a gilded chariot, while captive spoils and silver trumpets heralded his glory. Historians still argue whether the pomp-honored military achievement or served as a lavish distraction to placate restless masses. You inhale the acrid scent of burning incense mixed with sweat and oil from thousands of soldiers, and you half expect that cartoonish dragon from Section 3 to swoop overhead draped in triumphant purple. In medieval England, coronations unfolded with equal flair, the stone chill of Westminster Abbey, the hush broken by the clang of St. Edward's crown being placed on a monarch's brow. Mainstream fact, William the Conqueror was crowned on Christmas Day 1066, donning robes weighed down by gold and ermine to symbolize divinely granted authority. Fringe Whisper insists a mischievous minstrel once swapped the crown's velvet cap with a jester's motley hat, scandalizing noble guests, though Abbey records only mention unusual levity. You grin at the image of sharp-eyebrowed bishops trying to suppress giggles, a medieval meme before memes existed. Drums thunder as you're swept toward a Japanese enthronement ceremony. The hush of silk kimonos rustling contrasts the roar of the crowd beyond palace gates. Mainstream fact, the enthronement of Emperor Taisho in 1915 included the Daijosai ritual, where the new sovereign offers rice to ancestral deities, binding him to divine lineage. Scholars still argue whether such Shinto rites reflect genuine religious devotion or cleverly framed state propaganda. You taste faint ash and roasted rice in the air sensory detail, swirling like steam from a ceremonial bowl. A light joke drifts if you thought your family's holiday traditions were elaborate. Try following a millennia-old recipe for sacred rice, no instant pot allowed. Turn next to the Ottoman court's splendid circumcision festival for princes, complete with gilded canopies and cavalcades of dancing dervishes. Mainstream fact: these rites, known as Sunnet ceremonies, marked a boy's passage into manhood and princely eligibility, often staged with acrobats, musicians, and exotic animals paraded through Istanbul. Fringe lore claims some princes rode in palanquins painted with the defeated colors of rival dynasties, a subtle yet savage reminder of imperial supremacy. You catch a whiff of rosewater perfuming silk robes and hear the distant coo of release pigeons, symbols of peace that belied fierce palace rivalries. Another light joke: if you think your office baby shower was over the top, imagine gifting a royal prince an entire camel caravan. As you drift through Versailles' Hall of Mirrors, chandeliers dripping crystal reflections, you hear courtiers whispering behind gilded fans. Mainstream fact: Louis XIV staged the daily lever and coucher public rituals of rising and retiring that turned his routine into state theatre, ensuring nobles vied for favor by attending each Sun King moment. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies empowered or imprisoned the aristocracy by demanding flattery in return for proximity. You feel the cool marble under your velvet slippers and almost slip on spilled perfume, sensory detail that transports you to those mirrored halls where every glance and curtsy was a calculated move. Leap forward to modern times, the US presidential inauguration on the Capitol's West Front, where a robed official administers the oath, Bible in hand, under a shower of camera flashes. Mainstream fact: Franklin D. Roosevelt's first inauguration in 1933 took place amid the Great Depression, complete with the iconic first 100 days promise that set political rhythms for generations. Scholars still argue whether inaugural addresses genuinely unite citizens or simply serve as grand PR events. You smell faint exhaust from parade floats and the tang of spilled hot cocoa, the sensory jumble of specially erected stands and overheard chants. A light joke: if you think your local live stream lags, imagine broadcasting a sword-wielding oath to millions with 1930s technology. Meanwhile in Delhi, the Mughal emperor's accession used diamond-inlaid umbrellas and jeweled palanquins to impress visiting dignitaries. Mainstream fact: Jahangir's 1605 coronation included a procession with tigers on chains, elephant riders, and elephantine trumpets echoing through Red Fort's courtyards. Fringe rumor posits that some court poets slipped secret satirical couplets into the official program, mocking tax farmers only decipherable by astrologers under a full moon. You shiver at the imagined hush when those verses were uncovered, the shock echoing like a dropped quill. Another light joke: if you think your party playlist is eclectic, imagine a 17th century DJ spinning classical ragas beneath jeweled canopies. Even indigenous societies wielded ceremony as governance among the Aztecs. The new fire ceremony every 52 years involved extinguishing all city flames, then rekindling a new fire atop Cerro de la Estrella to ensure cosmic renewal. Mainstream fact: priests threw the last embers into the chest of a sacrificial victim to ignite the sacred flame, a gruesome yet profound symbol of rebirth. Historians still argue whether this ritual maintained cosmic order or terrified populations into compliance. You taste smoky char and adrenaline in the air, your pulse thumping like a ceremonial drum. A final light joke: if you believe your anxiety around daylight saving time is dramatic, try trusting your life to a once-in-a-lifetime bonfire. Throughout every era, rituals have harnessed spectacle to solidify authority, blending theology, theater, and social control. You carry the echo of trumpets, the glow of torches, and the scent of incense as you drift back into modern consciousness. Remember that fermented turnip mention from section 1. Here, the secret ingredient in ritual feasts wasn't flavor, it was awe. And as you step away from banquet halls, parade grounds and mirrored corridors, you realize that in the theater of power, you're both audience and actor swept along by the choreography of authority. You enter a quiet classroom, the smell of chalk dust and old wood hanging in the air like a memory, as a stern-faced teacher scribbles a date on the board. Yet what's taught here is more than knowledge, it's obedience disguised as learning. Tonight you're about to realize how education has often served not just to enlighten minds, but to engrave loyalty deep into your bones. Mainstream fact: during the Third Republic in France, 1870 to 1940, children were taught a nationalized version of history, emphasizing the glory of the French Revolution, the brilliance of Napoleon, and the righteousness of the Republic. Historians still argue whether this was a sincere attempt at unity or a calculated rebranding after the trauma of war and civil unrest. Either way, you can still smell the ink-stained desks and see little feet swinging under benches as students recited patriotic slogans by rote. One child asks about the Paris Commune. The teacher winces and flips past that chapter. Fringe rumor says some schoolbooks were printed with those pages glued together, literally sealing rebellion shut. You grin at the image of a curious 8-year-old steaming open a page like it's a spy novel. A light joke: if you think your high school skipped awkward chapters, try studying French history and realizing half the country's revolts are labeled miscellaneous. Another: imagine a test where correct means whatever the king prefers. And one more if you believe your syllabus is objective. I've got a textbook that teaches gravity as a royal favor. Falling objects simply respect the throne. Slide next into Imperial Japan in the early 20th century. Children bowed to portraits of the emperor each morning before beginning class. Mainstream fact textbooks emphasized loyalty to the state and the virtue of sacrifice, downplaying atrocities or foreign perspectives. Scholars still argue whether this indoctrination planted seeds of ultranationalism or was a defense mechanism against Western colonization. The smell of rice paper and lacquered wood hangs in the air, and you feel the weight of silence behind every reverent bow. Fringe tales speak of a rogue teacher who taught subversive haiku by hiding them inside math problems like turning rebellion into word puzzles. In Nazi Germany, education was weaponized. The curriculum for Hitler Youth included biology lessons on racial hierarchy, geography that justified expansion, and history glorifying Germanic tribes. Mainstream fact teachers were required to join the Nazi Party or risk dismissal, and undesirable textbooks were systematically removed. You hear the creak of jackboots across parquet floors as chalk dust swirls like ash. Scholars still argue whether post-war reforms truly cleansed this ideology from classrooms or whether ghosts of its language lingered for decades. One fringe theory insists that encoded resistance poems circulated in footnotes of grammar books, stanzas structured to look like examples of conjugation. Your breath catches as you walk into a Soviet-era school in 1950s Moscow. Lenin's portraits line the wall like watchful ancestors, and a red banner flutters at the window's edge. Mainstream fact Soviet textbooks erased opposing views, altered photographs, and portrayed Stalin as the infallible architect of peace, even as purges and famines raged. Historians still argue whether Soviet children believed the myth or merely feared the alternative. The scent of sour ink and cold cabbage soup clings to the air. Fringe stories claim that some dissident teachers taught Tolstoy by whispering quotes during fire drills, dodging surveillance, one metaphor at a time. Back in the US, consider the lost cause narrative in southern states, where textbooks well into the 20th century frame the Civil War as a noble stand for states' rights instead of slavery. Mainstream fact: some school districts used materials approved by United Daughters of the Confederacy, shaping generations of students' understanding of race and history. Scholars still argue whether recent textbook revisions have corrected this legacy or merely papered it over. The scent of sun-warmed plastic chairs and pine-scented floor cleaner fills the classroom. You feel the weight of a silent erasure, a battle not fought on fields but in margins. A light joke: if you think your math book had hidden agendas, try solving for x when x equals glory to the empire. Another: imagine a school play where every historical figure is played by the emperor. And one more if you believe teachers always pick the most accurate textbook. I've got a school-approved coloring book that portrays Napoleon riding a unicorn to Waterloo. You sit now in a post-apartheid classroom in South Africa. The chalkboard still bears faint outlines of past lessons, but now the curriculum includes Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Zulu oral histories, and colonial critiques. Mainstream fact: the country's post-1994 textbooks were rewritten to confront its painful past and uplift marginalized voices. Historians still argue whether these revisions go far enough or whether truth-telling has simply taken a new, more palatable shape. The scent of fresh chalk mixes with eucalyptus trees blowing outside open windows. A new student raises her hand asking about the Khoisan people. The teacher nods, and this time the page isn't glued shut. Education is memory weaponized or liberated. And as you step out of that time-warped classroom, the echo of whispered lessons follows you. Remember the cartoon dragon from section 3? Here he wears a mortarboard and scribbles dissent in red ink. And as you close your imaginary notebook and tuck your hands behind your back, you understand the chilling truth. Those who write the curriculum shape the future, and not everyone gets to hold the chalk. You walk through a shattered palace hallway, crumbling banners at your feet, and broken statues staring blankly into the dust. This isn't the end of history, it's the rebirth of it. Tonight you're here to witness how rebels, revolutionaries, and underdogs seize the pen and flip the script, rewriting the very narrative that once crushed them. And you probably won't make it through without rethinking what you thought you knew. Let's start in revolutionary France. Mainstream fact: after the storming of the Bastille in 1789, French revolutionaries rewrote not just laws but entire calendars. They renamed months, replaced saints' days with agricultural cycles, and introduced year one as a fresh start. History itself had to be cleansed of monarchy. Historians still argue whether this radical erasure was liberation or lunacy. Either way, the new Thermidor calendar sounds like a lobster-themed dinner party and makes you grateful for your boring Google Calendar. Fringe Whisper says a rebel schoolteacher secretly kept the old calendar carved on the underside of his desk just to spite the Committee of Public Safety. That's one way to hide nostalgia. You breathe in the chalky scent of paper, the waxy smoke of lamplight, and picture Jacobins burning royal portraits with the same fervor modern trolls edit Wikipedia. Remember that cartoon dragon from section 3 tonight? He's wearing a red liberty cap and roasting monarchies with satirical flames. A light joke: if you think your group chat gets spicy, try reading a guillotine-era pamphlet, half political manifesto, half recipe for chaos. Another: imagine a guy in a powdered wig yelling liberté while struggling to convert inches to the new metric system. And one more: if you believe revolutions are only about weapons, I've got a poorly translated Robespierre fanfic to sell you hot bloody and horribly paced. Slide now to Haiti, where in 1804 formerly enslaved people declared independence from France after years of brutal warfare. Mainstream fact: Haiti became the first black republic in the modern world, and its new leaders erased colonial place names, minted coins with images of liberty, and elevated their own history of resistance to center stage. Historians still argue whether the world's cold reception to Haiti was due to racism, economic self-interest, or both. Fringe accounts claim that some early Haitian schoolbooks taught geography by comparing the size of the island to every broken promise made by the French. You smirk sassy educational reform island edition. Next stop, the Soviet Union after the 1917 October Revolution. Mainstream fact. Bolsheviks toppled Tsarist monuments, replaced religious instruction with communist ideology and airbrushed political enemies out of photographs. The most famous example, Trotsky disappearing from images beside Lenin once Stalin deemed him an enemy. Scholars still argue whether these doctored visuals fooled citizens or merely confirmed their deepest fears. You stare at a grainy black and white photo and feel the ghost of a mustache once there, now gone like censorship playing peekaboo. Fringe Whisper tells of underground artists who painted missing comrades back into murals in secret homes, reverse erasing history with candlelit brushstrokes. Sensory detail hits, you smell paint fumes, hear the scrape of chisel on granite, and feel a phantom breeze from toppled statues. Every revolution has its iconoclasts. In post-Saddam Iraq, citizens pulled down his statue in Firdos Square. In post-apartheid South Africa, bronze tributes to colonial generals came under scrutiny. In the US, protesters defaced Confederate monuments demanding a version of history that reflects the voices once silenced beneath stone. Mainstream fact, the toppling of monuments often marks the climax of political upheaval. But historians still argue, does removing a statue erase the past, or does it finally acknowledge that history is always being rewritten? Fringe activists have proposed grave museums where fallen statues lie, toppled but preserved their context, explained in whispers and gravel paths. It's like a Stonehenge for outdated ideologies. You duck into a printing press room in 1979 Tehran, where newspapers switch from English headlines to Persian ones overnight. Mainstream fact, the Iranian Revolution replaced a secular monarchy with an Islamic republic, and with it came a full narrative overhaul from poem textbooks to children's stories. Scholars still debate whether this reclaimed cultural identity or swapped one form of indoctrination for another. A fringe joke floats through Tehran's alleys. Yesterday, I was Western today. I'm religious tomorrow. Maybe I'll be nostalgic. Another light joke, if you think your school had dress codes, try reading a 1980s Iranian school uniform manual. It's basically haute couture meets surveillance. And one more if you believe revolutions bring instant clarity. I have a fog machine that comes with every ideology shift. Step into Bolivia with Che Guevara's ghost still lingering in jungle air. His image, beret cigarette brooding gaze, was repurposed by rebels and capitalists alike. Mainstream fact, Che's diaries, turned posthumously into global literature, were edited and re-edited to inspire, not inform. Historians still argue whether his myth helps or hinders Latin America's true revolutionary heritage. Fringe legend says one publisher inserted a fake page mid-book that simply read, "Keep questioning everything." And you nod because at this point it's practically your bedtime mantra. The air grows cooler as you wander into post-colonial India, where Gandhi's Salt March now lines textbooks, but Subhas Chandra Bose's alliances with Axis powers get fewer paragraphs. Mainstream fact. India's independence narrative remains contested terrain, and different political parties favor different heroes. Scholars still argue whether a truly unified national memory is even possible, or if diversity demands divergent stories. Fringe teachers reportedly write history exams with open-ended questions like, who was right and who wrote this book? Imagine answering that on 4 hours of sleep. You leave the printing press, the battlefield, the schoolroom, the square. You've seen rebels scribble over royal crests, grassroots authors rewrite textbooks, and artists raise new statues from broken bronze. Remember the fermented turnip side note from section 1. Here the recipes evolved ferment, a few slogans distill, with fire serve with revolution. And as you vanish into a crowd chanting rewritten verses, you realize when you control your own story. History becomes a weapon not of the state but of the soul. You step through a rusting iron gate, boots crunching over gravel, as you cross into foreign soil, not by travel, but by conquest. Tonight you stand in the long shadow of empire, where entire continents were edited to fit European imaginations. You probably won't walk away from this without questioning the maps, the names and the languages you've always taken for granted. Let's start in British India. Mainstream fact, the Raj-era colonial administration rewrote local histories to justify their rule, portraying India as a land of chaos rescued by British order. Historians still argue whether these revisions were strategic fabrications or genuine cultural misunderstandings, but either way, Indian schoolchildren soon learned about Robert Clive before they learned about Ashoka. Fringe rumour says some British officials claimed the Taj Mahal was a Portuguese-built church with a dome inspired by Lisbon. You roll your eyes, picturing an old British officer squinting through binoculars, declaring that's definitely St. Margaret's. Sensory detail swells, the spice of cumin hangs in the humid air, mingling with the dry ink of textbooks printed in London. You remember the cartoon dragon from section 3. Here he is dressed in a red coat, stamping property of the crown across scrolls with gleeful ignorance. A light joke if you think your GPS gets streets wrong. Try navigating Delhi when half the neighborhoods were renamed after people you didn't vote for. Another imagine trying to explain cricket to a kid when all the heroes in the history books wore monocles. And one more if you believe imperial textbooks were objective. I have a bridge in Bengal to sell you colonially certified. Shift now to the Americas. In the 16th century, Spanish conquistadors arrived not only with swords but with scribes. Mainstream fact, Hernán Cortés commissioned letters that framed the Aztecs as bloodthirsty pagans, setting the stage for justified conquest. Those documents became the foundation for centuries of teaching about New Spain. Historians still argue whether Cortés exaggerated Aztec brutality or genuinely misunderstood their rituals. Fringe theories claim some conquistadors believed the Mexica worshipped a golden deer who spoke Latin, a rumor likely born from heatstroke and cultural confusion. You breathe the arid scent of baked clay as you wander through an abandoned codex hall where thousands of native texts were burned by missionaries who called them demonic. The silence screams louder than any war drum. You reach toward a half-charred manuscript, wondering what stories, medicines and cosmologies disappeared in that smoke. A cartoon dragon might have tried to save a scroll or two, but not even fantasy could outfly that inferno. Slide into 19th century Africa, where European colonizers carved up entire territories at the Berlin Conference, 1884-85, without a single African present. Mainstream fact, colonial powers divided ethnic groups and united rivals, then wrote schoolbooks to teach children that colonial borders were natural. Scholars still argue whether post-independence conflict stems more from these imposed divisions or from later power vacuums. Fringe whispers speak of a Ghanaian librarian who inserted his grandmother's folktales into the appendix of colonial civics books disguised as moral parables. You grin subversion in a spiral-bound form. A light joke if you think your high school group project had bad collaboration. Imagine 14 European nations deciding Africa's future over tea and maps. Another ever try tracing your heritage, only to find out your village got renamed 6 times by 3 empires, and one more if you believe colonial place names were chosen with care. I've got a dusty signpost labelled New London, Order 27, waiting for your family reunion. Now enter Australia, where Aboriginal Dreamtime stories were dismissed by colonial settlers as myth rather than oral history. Mainstream fact until the late 20th century, Australian schoolbooks largely ignored or sanitized the violent displacement of First Nations peoples. Scholars still argue whether government sorry campaigns truly addressed the trauma or merely polished the optics. Fringe rumour says one community secretly published a children's book written entirely in Pitjantjatjara, smuggled into urban libraries under barcode labels that read Koala Colouring Book. You imagine a librarian blinking twice before realizing the colouring pages were sacred maps of stars, rivers and songs. Sensory detail. The dry heat of eucalyptus leaves the crackle of an old intercom system in a school built on someone else's land, and the scent of chalk blending with desert wind. You feel it in your ribs, that ache of knowing erasure doesn't just hide the past, it distorts the present. In Palestine, textbooks differ depending on which side of the wall you're standing. In North Korea, children learn that Kim Il-sung shot down Japanese planes as a child prodigy. In post-genocide, Rwanda national curriculum was rewritten to encourage unity even as trauma trembled beneath each page. Mainstream fact. Every post-conflict nation must decide what parts of its past to teach. Historians still argue whether these educational resets promote healing or enforce forgetting. Fringe stories tell of teachers writing real history on blackboards, then erasing it before inspectors arrived. Remember the fermented turnip recipe from section 1? Here the flavor is more bitter. History boiled down, seasoned with omission, and served cold to future generations. A light joke if you think your school had a tough curriculum. Try surviving a syllabus that changes every time the flag does. Another, imagine a final exam where every answer depends on who won the last coup. And one more, if you believe borders are natural, try drawing one in the sand and watch how quickly someone else kicks it away. As you step out of this colonial classroom, the echo of rewritten histories trails behind you. A dragon watches from a chalkboard, corner wings draped over maps, re-inked by foreign hands. You pause, eyes lingering on a name that once belonged to a mountain, now renamed after a duke who never climbed it. And you know, when conquerors come, they don't just take the land, they take the story too. You step into a softly humming room where bright screens flicker and whispers are replaced by algorithmic clicks. Tonight history isn't rewritten by scribes or scholars, but by soundbites, memes and montage edits. And you probably won't notice it happening until your feed is already filtered. The screen flashes and you're back in 1960. Mainstream fact, John F. Kennedy's televised debate against Richard Nixon changed how voters evaluated leaders, not just by their words, but by their appearance, their sweat, their poise. Historians still argue whether Kennedy won the debate on policy or on charisma, but one thing was clear. Television had become the new history book, written one pixel at a time. Fringe rumor claims some makeup artists applied extra bronzer to JFK's jawline to accentuate his heroic silhouette. Turns out jawlines win hearts and headlines. Fast forward to the 1990s and you're in a history class where the teacher rolls in a wheeled TV cart. You don't remember the textbook lesson, but you remember Schindler's List, Braveheart, or the Patriot films that blurred history and Hollywood. Mainstream fact, many of these blockbusters altered timelines, added fictional characters, or polished heroes into saintly underdogs. Scholars still argue whether this emotional truth does more good than harm. A light joke, if you thought your crush exaggerated their resume, try asking William Wallace how often he wore blue face paint. Another, imagine a Roman senator watching Gladiator and yelling, "That guy's not even a real emperor." And one more if you believe every biopic is historically accurate. I've got a director's cut of the Trojan War starring talking horses and auto-tuned oracles. Sensory detail, the glow of the television screen against your face in a dark room, the buttery scent of popcorn mixed with stale carpet, the murmur of students absorbing stories more captivating than any chalkboard. You realize movies teach as much history as textbooks, and sometimes more depending on who shows up to class. Slide into the 2000s. Cable news channels battle 24/7 for your attention, and history becomes a tug-of-war between soundbites. Mainstream fact. The September 11th attacks were broadcast live, searing themselves into global consciousness in real time. Within weeks, documentaries aired to frame the story. Heroes, villains, motives. Scholars still argue whether such rapid narratives help the public understand or merely cemented fear. Fringe media theorists claim some history specials were drafted before the smoke cleared, complete with CGI models and eerie narration. You feel the static buzz of a news ticker sliding endlessly across your screen like a digital chant. Then came YouTube. Now a 17-year-old with a good mic and video editor can upload a documentary viewed by millions. Some are brilliant, fact-checked, cited nuanced, others not so much. Fringe channels push alternative histories. Ancient aliens built the pyramids, the moon landing was faked. Napoleon was 4 feet tall and an angry cinnamon roll. You chuckle, but you also scroll. A light joke. If you think your uncle's Facebook post is bad, try arguing with a YouTuber who thinks Atlantis is under the Denver airport. Another history class taught you the French Revolution was about bread. YouTube taught you it was about Illuminati lizard bankers. And one more if you believe every viral documentary is neutral. I've got a time-traveling knight who wants to sponsor your next video. Just click skip ad. Sensory detail, the low hum of your laptop fan, the faint click of your mouse, the occasional sting of blue light in your eyes as you fall deeper down the rabbit hole. You pause a video, rewind, replay. The narrator's voice is soothing, the music swelling with emotional gravity. But wait, did that quote really happen? Did that photo belong to that year? You open a tab, you check, it doesn't. But the video already feels true. Remember the cartoon dragon from section 3? Here he's got headphones and a ring light pointing to a green screen battlefield with a PowerPoint of questionable maps. He's charismatic. He's wrong, but he gets 10 million views a month. You scroll through Netflix, dozens of historical series, dramatized documentaries, alt history retellings. Mainstream fact. The Crown took creative liberties with real events in the British royal family. Historians still argue whether these dramatic edits distort public understanding or simply make the past emotionally accessible. Fringe fans once tried to fact-check the Queen's wardrobe continuity across seasons, concluding she must have had a magical closet with its own timeline. A light joke if you think your mom misremembers family drama. Wait until you see season 3 of The Crown. Another, the only thing more fictional than historical dramas. The based on true events disclaimer. And one more if you think you can tell real from fake. I've got a 10-part TikTok series on ancient Viking mermaids you might want to binge. Your phone buzzes, a trending hashtag scrolls by, #history hack, #secret empires, #real past exposed. One video claims Thomas Edison stole all his ideas. Another says Cleopatra was actually a time traveler. Another insists World War II was secretly about alien technology. You want to laugh, and sometimes you do, but you also wonder how many people take these digital echoes as gospel. In a digital age, history becomes modular. It's clipped, cropped, remixed, and fed to you in 30-second bursts. Scholars still argue whether we're in an age of democratized knowledge or mass hallucination. Either way, you're holding history in your pocket, wrapped in algorithms and powered by ads. Remember the fermented turnip footnote from section 1. In this timeline, it's a recipe video with 3 million views rebranded as Ancient Gut Health Secrets. And that cartoon dragon. He just launched a podcast interviewing Socrates about cancel culture. As you power down for the night, the screen's afterglow lingers in your vision. You feel it, your sense of the past shifting with every scroll, every autoplay, every cinematic pause. And in this age of history on demand, you realize it's not about what happened, it's about who edits it. You wander into a digital hallway lined with glowing comment threads echoing with a hum of algorithmic whispers and autoplaying loops. You're not in a library anymore, you're in the hive. Tonight we dive into social media, the arena where history is less written than weaponized. And you probably won't leave this scroll without rethinking every like, share and repost you've ever tapped. It starts small. A quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln pops up on your timeline. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. You laugh because, of course, that's the joke. But the deeper irony is how often we do. Mainstream fact studies show that false historical claims spread faster online than verified ones. Scholars still argue whether the structure of social media inherently favors misinformation, or whether we're just naturally drawn to drama, certainty, and things that fit our biases like old sweaters. You tap through a TikTok that claims the Library of Alexandria wasn't burned, it was secretly moved to the Vatican. Fringe creators layer cinematic music, grainy scroll images, and ominous Latin whispers. You know it's probably not true, but it feels true. And sometimes that's all the internet needs. A light joke. If you think your grandpa's fishing stories grew bigger over time, wait until you see how the French Revolution looks after 5 filter passes. Another imagine Julius Caesar live streaming the Ides of March. Hey guys, little betrayal vibes today. Haha, Brutus backstabber. And one more if you believe everyone's doing their own research. I've got a YouTube rabbit hole with no ladder out. Swipe to Twitter, sorry X, here history is a punchline. Or a battleground, sometimes both. Someone posts, Napoleon was short. Someone replies, actually he was average height for his time. Then someone else responds, okay, but he still had short king energy. Suddenly you're 3 threads deep and no one remembers what the original point was. You can smell the burnt pixels, taste the sarcasm in every retweet. Historians still argue whether social platforms trivialize history or simply reflect how it's always been debated, loudly, messily, and with a touch of ego. Sensory detail, the tap-tap of your thumbs, the cool glow of the screen at 2:47 a.m., the hollow satisfaction of winning an argument you'll forget by sunrise. You scroll past a meme, Socrates with AirPods labeled, when the vibes are eternal, but the questions are annoying. Remember the cartoon dragon from section 3? He's now a Twitter bot, correcting bad history with fire emojis and petty quotes from Voltaire. On Facebook, Aunt Susan reposts a viral post about ancient civilizations using electricity, complete with pictures of Baghdad batteries. Mainstream fact, those artifacts do exist, but whether they powered anything is still up for debate. Fringe theory pushes it further, aliens, Atlantis, Tesla, time travelers. You sigh, you consider replying, you don't. Another light joke if you think pyramid schemes are bad. Try arguing with someone who thinks the pyramids were built by Martians. Another imagine trying to explain archaeology to someone whose source is some guy named Blade Warrior 98. And one more if you believe Facebook arguments change hearts. I have a PhD from the University of Copy-Paste to sell you. YouTube Shorts serve you a clip claiming Churchill was secretly a time traveler sent to defeat fascism. The voiceover is British. The footage is black and white. The comment section is chaotic neutral. Mainstream fact, Winston Churchill did write essays on future warfare, including mentions of hypothetical death rays. Historians still argue whether he was prescient paranoid or just poetic? Fringe rumor that Churchill once consulted a mystic during WWW who claimed to receive visions from the lost city of Lemuria. There's no proof, but it makes for excellent clickbait. On Reddit, you find a long post titled "The Real History They Don't Want You to Know," filled with half-truths twisting obscure events into a neat narrative of conspiracy. It has 12,000 upvotes. The top comment simply says, "Based." You close the tab. You reopen it 5 minutes later. You're hooked. You're mad. You're fascinated. You smell popcorn that isn't there. Modern historians on TikTok try to fight back stitching misinformation with receipts offering gentle corrections in 30 seconds or less. One wears 18th century clothing to explain why Marie Antoinette never actually said, "Let them eat cake." Another creates a recurring skit with Napoleon and Cleopatra stuck in therapy. Scholars still argue whether this digital intervention is a renaissance of education or a last-ditch effort to keep nuance alive in a landscape allergic to it. A light joke if you think Socrates would hate TikTok. Imagine him as a For You page philosopher sipping iced oat lattes and dropping hot takes from 400 BCE. Another Aristotle posting aesthetics explained had virtue vibes. One more Plato would definitely write cryptic captions and never reply to comments. Remember the fermented turnip footnote from section 1. In this world, it's now an Instagram wellness trend with a promo code and the cartoon dragon. He's gone full influencer selling historically accurate merch that's 60% cotton, 40% speculation. As you put your phone down and stretch your fingers, you realize history hasn't just gone viral, it's gone fragmented. Everyone's a narrator, everyone's a critic, and if you don't choose your lens, someone else will. The past is now a feed. Scroll carefully. You now find yourself in a pristine glass office building, the hum of HVAC systems above, and LED lights buzzing faintly, a world away from palaces and scrolls. But make no mistake, tonight we're deep in another power zone. You're about to see how corporations rewrite history just as smoothly as emperors ever did. And you probably won't look at a founder's story the same way again. You start in the warm glow of a tech company lobby. On the wall, giant photographs of a young hoodie wearing genius staring into a laptop in a garage. Mainstream fact, Steve Jobs did indeed co-found Apple in a California garage in the 1970s, but historians still argue whether that garage was really their base of operations or just a convenient origin myth. Fringe rumor says the garage was mostly used for photo ops and that early Apple prototypes were built elsewhere. You almost smell the coffee-stained carpet, the plasticky tang of electronics warmed under tungsten light, and a faint aura of myth-making cologne. You chuckle because if you think founding a company is all inspiration and pizza try, filing patents and dodging bankruptcy while wearing sandals. A light joke, if garages birthed greatness, your uncle's tool shed would have already launched 3 IPOs. Another, imagine Zuckerberg building Facebook in a dorm, but only because the campus Starbucks was closed. And one more, if you believe all origin stories are true. I've got a commemorative garage door opener signed by Thomas Edison to sell you. Turn the corner and now you're in a sleek museum exhibit sponsored by a major beverage brand. Coca-Cola, for example, is presented with nostalgic flair. 1950s diners, Santa Claus sipping a bottle, polar bears skating on ice. Mainstream fact, Coca-Cola helped define modern Santa imagery. But scholars still argue whether the brand's role in global expansion came with cultural cost, such as monopolizing local markets or redefining traditions around commercial calendars. Fringe whispers claim some vintage ad slogans were copied from earlier medicinal tonics, just with liver cure swapped for refreshing taste. You smile imagining a Victorian huckster sipping soda and pitching it as a potion. Sensory detail, the hiss of a freshly opened can, the clink of a vending machine drawer, the scent of caramel syrup mixed with aluminum and nostalgia. You can almost hear that jingle looping in your brain. It's the real thing, but is it? Next, you're in a fast food corporate archive. A cheerful film plays of Ray Kroc founding McDonald's, flipping burgers with entrepreneurial zeal. Mainstream fact: Kroc was instrumental in expanding the chain, but the original concept came from the McDonald brothers, who were eventually bought out. Historians still argue whether Kroc's retelling was brilliance or branding theft. Fringe joke: the McDonald brothers reportedly received no royalties from the explosive global empire. You picture a cartoon dragon flipping burgers on a flat-top grill, labeling each patty with a revisionist history extra cheese. A light joke: if you think sharing credit is hard, imagine turning your family recipe into a billion-dollar business and getting paid in handshakes. Another: you know what's worse than stealing someone's fries? Stealing their legacy. And one more: if you believe founders always found things. I've got a trademarked Happy Meal timeline for you. Includes a toy and a side of confusion. Corporate histories thrive on narrative control. Companies invest in documentaries, coffee table, books, even children's versions of their journeys. Mainstream fact: many oil companies have heritage teams that document their environmental contributions, but skim past oil spills or labor strikes. Historians still argue whether this is reputation management or willful omission. Fringe theorists claim one major energy company buried 1960s studies, warning of climate change, then later sponsored Earth Day events. You feel the weight of irony press against your ribs like a smoggy breeze wrapped in lavender marketing copy. Modern asides drift in. Imagine a brand posting Nantam TBT to the time it union busted an entire city block. Or better yet, picture a cereal company editing its own Wikipedia page to erase lawsuits involving magical sugar content. A light joke: if you think influencer bios are curated, wait until you read corporate mission statements that sound like they were written by monks. Another: we believe in transparency, says the press release just as the CEO quietly deletes 20 years of email. And one more: if you believe sustainability always means sustainable behavior. I've got a reusable straw made entirely of greenwashing to sell you. Now wander into the fashion industry. You pass a glossy video about a famous designer who rose from nothing, conveniently skipping over their wealthy patrons and manufacturing scandals. Mainstream fact: some luxury brands used prison labor or underpaid offshore factories before rebranding with ethical language and pastel tones. Scholars still argue whether corporate rebranding heals reputations or merely paints over the cracks. Fringe rumors suggest some companies staged their own leaks of damaging photos just to control the spin when media inevitably ran with the story. Remember that fermented turnip footnote from section 1? Here it's a heritage recipe on a brand's Instagram, romanticized into a luxury pickling kit for $49.99. And the cartoon dragon, he's now in a marketing meeting pitching authentic fire-roasted nostalgia as the Q3 campaign slogan. You pass a gift shop on your way out. Books, mugs, plush mascots, all wrapped in stories about humble beginnings and world-changing missions. None of it mentions strike scandals or lawsuits. You touch a t-shirt that says, "Legacy starts here," and wonder whose legacy and who got erased. As you exit the glass doors, the scent of air conditioning gives way to real air, hot, imperfect, unfiltered. You realize that corporate histories don't lie outright. They just highlight the frame, crop the picture, and slap a filter on the top. And in the age of branding, the company with the best origin story wins no matter who really turned on the lights. You find yourself in a dimly lit room. No more palaces, no cathedrals, no offices or timelines. Just your breath, a blanket over your legs, and a quiet thought. What happens now that you know? Tonight we don't uncover one more secret, We reflect on all the secrets we've already passed. You've walked through fires built from books, crossed battlefields made of curriculum, and stepped over borders drawn with steel and ink. And now you're here floating in the soft haze between memory and meaning. You remember the scribe from Section 1 quill trembling in candlelight, omitting the king's defeat. You remember the pharaohs rewriting creation, the monks reshaping sacred text, the emperors carving their egos into marble. You remember maps hiding lands, schools hiding truths, rituals choreographing loyalty, art whispering rebellion in oil paint. You remember the crowd tearing down a statue. You remember a social media post that felt too real to be fake and too fake to be real. Mainstream fact: no history is ever complete. Even the best record is just a version, a point of view fossilized in ink. Historians still argue whether we can ever know the past objectively, or whether the act of remembering is always a little political, always a little personal. And maybe that's okay. Fringe thinkers like to say we're all time travelers, rewriting our own biographies every time we tell a story. You laugh softly at the idea. Maybe you've been doing that all along. Sensory detail now fades, the scratch of quill replaced by the soft buzz of your phone, the scent of parchment replaced by laundry soap. You pull the blanket up a little higher. The cartoon dragon. He's there too, curled on the windowsill, his tail thumping gently as he nods off one last fermented turnip recipe tucked beneath his wing. And now the wind down begins. You stretch your toes beneath the covers, letting your limbs relax as the breath slows in your chest. The thoughts you've gathered tonight, kingdoms, rituals, revolts, algorithms, settle quietly like dust on old furniture. Let them rest there. You don't need to organize them right now. In this space, the contradictions of history aren't problems to solve. They're melodies to hum in the dark. Some truths were silenced, but others survived in whispers, in margins, in jokes and prayers and broken statues. Power may have tried to hide history, but it never stopped people from remembering in their own way. Tonight, let that memory be soft. Let it float around you like fog on an early morning field. Let the shadows become gentle, the sharp facts worn smooth by time and story. You did well. You wandered bravely through 15 chambers of secrets, and now you're exactly where you need to be, on the edge of dreams, carrying all that quiet power with you. So close your eyes. Let your mind drift not backward, but inward. Because no matter how it's written, how it's framed, how it's twisted or forgotten, your story still belongs to you.